All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Nathan Smith. I'm the digital programming coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. Thank you so much for joining me today for Microsoft Excel Part 4, Pivot Tables, Pivot Charts, and Lookup. I'm really excited to get into this. This is a really fun session. There's a lot of useful stuff here, so I hope y'all will get a lot out of it. Before we dive in, a few quick things to tackle here. Let me go ahead and start by just dropping into the various chats a link to the example file. And that way you can download it and follow along if you feel so inclined. If you don't want to follow along with the example file, that is perfectly fine too. You can just watch. That's not a bad way to go. And of course, you'll be able to circle back and watch this later on the Cal's YouTube channel. So if you don't want to do that, or if it doesn't work out for some reason, then you're not stuck, and it'll definitely still be okay. So but I do want you to have that link so that way you can get to the example file if you want. You can also download a handout there that's got a lot of the key information we're going to cover in the class so that you can go back later on and get a little refresher if you need it. So that can be handy too. So let's see. Other things to mention. One thing that I always want to say right at the start is if you have questions during the course of the class, please speak up and let me know. Don't worry about if it might, if you feel like it might seem like a silly question or something like that. I'm not at all concerned about that. If you are, or if it's a little off topic, that's not a concern either. If you feel like you might be interrupting, you're not. I am not at all bothered by that. The point of a technology class is for you to learn some useful stuff about technology. So if that's happening, even if we're a little, even if we're a little off into the weeds, or even if I don't get to all the points on my outline, that's perfectly fine. That's a much more successful class than a class where I cover each and every point in my outline, but you're sitting there going, what is he talking about? So if you have questions, please speak up and ask them. How will you do that? Well, if you're joining me in Zoom and you're on a computer, what you'll want to do is look at the bottom of your Zoom window there. You might have to move your mouse around, but you should see a little speech bubble that says chat down at the bottom. Just click on that and type your question into the chat box that pops up. Usually it's going to show up on the right of your Zoom window. If you are working on, or if you are joining me via one of the live streams, if you're on Facebook, what you'll want to do is just comment on the video the way you would any other post on Facebook, and I'll see that comment and I'll be able to respond to it. If you are joining me via YouTube, what you'll want to do is look for the live chat. It should be off to the right of the video if you are watching on a computer, and if you're on a mobile device, it should be underneath the video. And so in any of those places, you can drop me a question, and I will be able to see it and respond, and we'll make sure that those questions get addressed. Also, if there are technical issues, please let me know. We've already had one technical issue so far. The music stopped working at the beginning here. So I don't want to be stuck where my mic's muted, or the screen share is frozen up or something like that, and they don't know about it. And then we waste a lot of time with y'all going, let's see. Just if that happens, drop me a message in the Q&A or in the chat, and I will be very grateful to you for doing so. All right, let's see. Anything else to tackle? Exciting stuff. So we've been doing technology classes via Zoom this way for a couple years now, and and we are planning a grand opening for the classroom, or a grand reopening for the classroom up here at the main library. So if you're interested in attending technology classes in person here at the main library, soon you'll be able to do that. Our first big event that we're really where we're kind of our official sort of grand opening. We'll probably have a few little things here and there, but probably our official grand opening is going to be on I believe it's April 26th. We are going to have an open lab session here with not only me, but also April Smith, our new digital literacy specialist, and our digital literacy guides too. So the gang will all be here. It's going to be very exciting. And so I definitely encourage y'all to, if you have technology questions you want answered, or you need some kind of troubleshooting help, come on up to Open Lab. We're going to start having those fairly regularly. And we're going to start doing other classes in the classroom as well. That doesn't mean we'll be off Zoom. Most of the classes from there on out will be hybrid classes. So we'll be presenting them on Zoom and in the classroom for live attendees simultaneously. So that's really exciting and a little nerve-wracking. I'm finishing putting the final touches on getting the classroom ready to do that. But very soon it should be extremely capable of doing that, and we're really excited about it. So that's the main stuff. There's plenty of other things. Check out cals.org. There's going to be tomorrow night one of the financial literacy programs is happening at 6:30. We're going to have some let's see, we're going to be doing some other stuff. We've got a Six Bridges presents author discussion next week. So lots of cool stuff happening. Keep an eye on cals.org, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you'll see a lot of cool things. We're planning summer reading club coming up here soon. So lots of stuff happening. Okay, here we go. So let me go ahead and fire up the screen sharing. All right. I shouldn't have switched away from the Zoom window. There we are. Okay, great. All right, so you should see the Zoom window there in front of you, or the Excel window there in front of you now. Again, just like we've done at the beginning of each class, up at the top, we've got enable editing here in this yellow bar. You'll need to click that to be able to follow along with most of what we're going to do during class today. And it should kind of, that should give you this setup here with all of the things. I haven't updated this little thing in a while, so fellow nerds out there, you might notice some things that are missing. That's okay. The point is just to have an example here. So let's go ahead and dig into this. Okay, so here's what we're going to be doing today. We are going to be talking about pivot tables. But in order to do that, first, we're going to be talking about tables, which are related, but not quite the same. And they're extremely useful. So we'll be talking about tables and so yeah, that's the first thing. The next thing we'll be doing is, oh, Nancy, you said you're not seeing the file to download. So the link up there just above you in chat, I'll drop it back in there for you. It should take you to a page that says, it should take you to, well, I'll screen share it for a moment. It should take you to this. You should be able to click part 4 example file right here underneath the banner to download the example file. No problem. Let's see. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about tables. Then we're going to talk about pivot tables, which are really, really cool and useful. Then we're going to talk briefly about pivot charts. And finally, we're going to cover the VLOOKUP function in Excel, which is a really handy one to know your way around. So that's our plan for today. And let's go ahead and dive in. Let's talk about tables first. Okay. So tables are a really nice way to make your data a little more, a little easier to manage on your spreadsheets, particularly if you have multiple sets of data on a single spreadsheet. Okay, so looking at this, I've got a list of Marvel movies and a list of Star Wars movies. And if I were to use sort and filter, like we talked about in part 1, up here in the corner, let me actually turn my camera off for just a moment so that y'all can see, because I think it's probably going to be blocked by it. Okay, up here at the top, we have sort and filter. If I click on that and I click filter, what it's going to do is give me these 4 little drop down arrows up at the top, right? So that's all well and good. That's what I expected. But now let's say that I want to sort these in order here. By say release date, for example. I'll click the little arrow up at the top and I'll click sort oldest to newest. When I do that, you'll notice they are kind of in release order, but we have a problem because our stuff has gotten mixed up here. We had 2 different sets of data, 2 different lists of movies, right? But now it's just one list of movies. And down at the bottom here, we have title, release date, director, writer, because we had those headings in the middle, to denote where the first set of data stopped and the second set of data started. So we've made a mess for ourselves, unfortunately. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the top and I'm going to click the undo button right here. Or you can press Control Z on your keyboard or Command Z if you're on a Mac. And that should reset everything so that I have my 2 separate lists of movies now. But what can I do? I do want to sort them by release date, but I want to keep the groups of data together, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come up to the top and I've got my, my selection on cell A1 where it says title. I'm going to hold down with my mouse button and I'm going to drag until I get over here to cell D24 and then let go. When I do that, what's going to happen is I'm going to have my, all of those cells selected, all of the Marvel movie cells selected here. And then what I want to do in order to keep these sets of data separate, but have them show up in the, where I wanted them to be, what I'm going to do is come up to the top and I'm going to click Format as Table. And I'm just going to choose a style here. So I'll choose this yellow one this time, or gold, I guess it says. When I click on that, and you don't have to choose the same one that I did. When I click on that, it pops up and gives me this little dialog box. It says, where is the data for your table? And it's giving me A1 to D24. Now, again, just a reminder, the reason we have the dollar signs here, $A, $1, and then $D, $24. That is cell A1 to cell D24, that range of cells like we talked about in previous weeks. But the dollar signs make it absolute. In other words, it's not going to, the cells are not going to shift around according to where we copy and paste something or things like that. So that's done. I have a checkbox that says my table has headers, and in fact, it does. So we want to keep that checked. And if you accidentally selected other cells that don't have data in them or things like that, then make sure that you might need to change what's written here. But as long as it says $A, $1, colon, $D, $24, then you're good to go. That's our range selected. When I click OK, This will change a filtered range. Okay. All right. I need to remove that filtering really quick. Sorry about that. I'll click cancel here. I'm going to click go up to sort and filter. Whoops. Let me turn the camera off again so y'all can see that. I'm going to go up here to sort and filter, and I'm going to click filter again to clear the little, to get rid of the little drop-down boxes up at the top. And now we can do this. So I'm selecting again cells A1 to D24, format as table, select this, and then just click OK. Because our default settings, we looked at them for a moment to see what they were, but our default settings were right. So I'm going to click OK. And now I have this little table here. So I've got a kind of a bright gold thing, bright gold band at the top, and then my thing at the and then the rest of my cells down here below. I'm gonna, if I go up here, I can change the look of it, and I am gonna change it a little bit. If I go to medium here, you'll notice I have kind of the same thing, but I've got this little like zebra stripe kind of situation, what they call banded rows. Click on that, and that's going to change it so that I get one that's shaded in a little more darkly, and then a little more lightly, and a little more darkly, and a little more lightly. So that way it's very easy to tell what's on what row. So there's that. We've got, and now you'll notice a few things have happened since I've turned this into a table. First of all, I can sort, but it won't affect the data down here that's outside the table. So if I go up here, release date, click on oldest to newest, actually it's not going to change because that's how it was already arranged. But if I wanted to sort, say, alphabetically by title, I'll go up to the top, click on the little drop down arrow next to title and sort A to Z. And then there it is. So now they're all arranged alphabetically by title, and that's great. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and make this into a table as well. I'm going to select cell A25, which has title in it again, and then go down to cell D36, which has the last cell with data in it. I'm going to come up to the top, format as table, and this time I'm going to select, say, this blue one. Again, where's the data for your table? All that's good. We'll click OK. And now we have two separate sets of data that are visually distinct from each other. I can sort these however I want to. I can filter them even if I go up to the top here. Let's say I only want to see ones from, 2017 or something. I'll uncheck, select all, check just 2017 and click OK. And now I only see the 2017 ones. Tables can be really, really useful for a bunch of different reasons. I've showed you the sorting and filtering. Another thing that's useful with tables, let me actually go ahead and remove that filter really quick. Another thing that's useful with tables is, check this out. If I scroll down a little bit, you'll notice up at the top, rather than A, B, C, and D, I actually get title, release date, director, and writer up here in place of those. And I get my drop-down boxes so I can sort and filter here without having to scroll up. So that's really convenient, particularly if you've got a lot of data in your table. You can see those headings right at the top. So so that's really handy. The banded rows are useful, particularly if you're printing something out. Makes it a lot easier to see what's on what row. And you've got a bunch of other little tools you can use. One thing you can even do, which is really, really handy, is up here at the top, you'll notice it says table name, table 1. If I were to change this name to something more descriptive, like Marvel, and I just press enter, the table has now been named. If I go somewhere else in my workbook and I write a formula and I want it to refer to the data inside this table, I can use this table name anywhere, just like the names that we talked about in the session 2 weeks ago, I believe, in part 2, where we talked about absolute references, and then we talked about names. So we've named this table, and I can use this anywhere that a formula that I need to put a range of cells inside a formula. I'll drop that in here, or I can drop the name of the table in here instead. All right, let's see. Okay, cool. So that's tables. Let's go ahead and we'll shift into pivot tables. But before we do that, let me give you a moment or two to ask whatever questions you've had so far, and then we'll get into it. Let's see. Okay, yeah, Nancy, can you describe what you're seeing when you click that link? What's going on there? Let me drop it back in the chat for you. Okay, that was totally my fault. I sent it to hosts and panelists, which means it just goes to me. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah, let me give you a moment or two to sort that out and give everybody else a moment or two to ask questions really quick, and then we'll dive into the pivot table example. All right, great. Excellent. So let's see, here we go. Let me take a look here, and all right. Okay, great. All right, Nancy, glad you got it. So let's go ahead and keep digging in here. Actually, hang on just a second. All right. Cool. Okay, great. So the next example that we've got is I'm going to click on this order list, and we've got everything. And what we've got here is a bunch of different fake orders from fake customers. And what I want to do here is I want to shift this around so that, or I want to be able to see my data in a little more helpful way. Basically, we've got 2 years worth of orders here from our fake company. And the problem is, well, we don't have a whole lot of useful information that we can actually act on here. So we've got our we've got all of the or we've got an order number, we've got a date, we've got an amount, we've got phone numbers and addresses and email addresses and everything. But as we're looking through this, we're not really seeing very much. It's going to be hard to pull out useful information here. So what we're going to do is we want to use pivot tables to kind of analyze this and figure out if we can pull up, if we can pull out something a little more useful. So first of all, what we want to do is we want to turn all of this into a table. And I'll show you why in a moment, but let's just start it this way for now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click to make sure I'm selecting cell A1. And on my keyboard, I'm going to hold Control and Shift. For Mac users, I believe it's going to be Command Shift. Could be Option, but I'm not 100%. You might have to fiddle with it a little bit. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Control Shift and hit my right arrow key on the keyboard. And what that should do is select all of column row 1 over to column N right here. And then once I've got that selected, I'm going to do Control Shift and I'm going to do down on my keyboard. And then and what that should do is select all of the data on my sheet there. Okay, cool. So what you should have is all of cells A1 to A1001 selected here. That will, and so we can analyze all of this data at once. I know it's a whole lot of stuff. So we want to make sure we've got it all selected. So we've got that taken care of. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the top. Well, I shouldn't have clicked out of the window. All right. I'm going to redo that. Control Shift right and Control Shift down. I've got everything selected. And now what I want to do is come up to the top and I can click Format as Table and select a style. I'll choose this one this time. I'll click OK. And there it is. One thing I can also do if I am inclined is rather than going to Format as Table on the home tab, I can also hit Table up here, at the top, and that'll do the same thing, and it'll basically give you this default style. Let's see. So that is sorted out. Now we've got our table here. Now what I want to do is I want to turn this table into a pivot table. So I'm going to come up to the top on the Insert tab and click Pivot Table, or I can click the down arrow here and click From Table/Range, or on the Table Design tab that shows up at the top, I can click Summarize with Pivot Table. Any of that will work, and it'll take me to basically the same place. I'm going to get, it says select a table or range. Mine says table 3 because we created those 2 initial tables there. There's an option for new worksheet or to place the pivot table on an existing worksheet. I'm going to keep it on new worksheet because that makes it a whole lot less complicated. And then down here where it says add this data to the data model, I'm not going to check that because I'm only using one particular range of cells here. And then I'm going to click OK. Cool. All right. So now we've got our blank pivot table. Give me just one more moment. There's one other thing I need to sort out. Okay, great. Thank you so much for your patience. There we go. All right, so let's dive in and let's analyze the data here using our pivot tables or using a pivot table. Okay, so really quickly, the first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out, well, we need to find a numerical value to start with. This is a key thing that I learned when I was preparing to teach this class initially that unlocked pivot tables for me. I tried to play around with them before and run into a lot of problems. So rather than, and this really changed my whole outlook on it and helped me figure out what the deal was and why I needed to, and how I needed to start with pivot tables. So if nothing else, the first thing that I want to, and the most important thing I want to impress on you in creating a pivot table is once you've created the pivot table itself, the first thing that you want to do is take some sort of numerical value and you want to put it in this values area right here. So in this case, the most obvious one is amount right here, which is the amount that was actually paid by the customer for their order. So I'm going to take this amount field, drag it down here, drop it under this values column, and we've got sum of amount right there. So you'll notice over here, we also have sum of amount. And this is actually our first piece of useful information that we've gathered from our pivot table. So over here in the order list, what we had was just a whole bunch of stuff and different dollar amounts and different customers and different addresses and all that stuff. But over here, when we drag amount underneath this values area, we actually get the sum of all of those amount numbers put together. So we've got $100,253,922.80. That's the grand total of all the revenue from all of those orders put together. So we've already learned something useful from our pivot table, and we haven't even pivoted it yet. So let's dig into this further and see what else we can do. Okay. Next. Okay. So in the order list, there are a bunch of different, if you look at all the addresses, you'll notice there are a bunch of addresses in the US and a bunch of addresses in Canada. And those are the two places that our example company does business. So what we want to do is try and figure out how much of our business is coming from the US and how much of it is coming from Canada. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to head to the state and province, or excuse me, the country up here at the top in this list. And I'm going to drag it down to columns here for the moment. When I do, I get sum of amount. Canada, $21,896,448.40. US, $78,357,474, $474.40. So again, I've learned something useful by just adding something, dragging another one of these fields into one of these boxes here. What I've done is basically I've taken that big pile. So you can visualize it like this. And I find this really helpful. Hopefully you will too. The way that I like to visualize it is when I take this amount right here and I drag it down into this values area, what it's doing is it's taking all of that money, all of that revenue that we brought in from all of these orders over on the order list there, and it's just piling it all into a big old pile of money, right? Scrooge McDuck style. And then what's happening is we're getting in there and we're actually, or when we add additional option or additional fields to these boxes here, we are dividing that big pile of money into smaller piles of money. So in this case, we're dividing it up into the $21 or $22 million Canada pile and the $78 million US pile. And that's basically what you're doing as you work with pivot tables. You're taking your data and you're dividing it up into these smaller pieces based on different, based on the information that's in your table that you started with. So, so again, with this values field or with the sum of amount here, I should say I've started using the word field here because that's what Excel does when you create a pivot table. But when it says fields, really, at least to start, what it's referring to is the columns in your original data source. So if you look at this, you'll see we've got order number, date, amount, number of items, street address, city, state, or province. And when I go over here to the order list, you'll see the exact same thing at the top here. Order number, date, amount, number of items, street, city, state, or province, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where these fields are coming from. Is from the from your column headings in your initial data set. Then you've got a lot more options to divide this up a little bit further. Let's do the date. So I'm going to come up here and find the date field, click and drag that down into rows. And when I drop it there, you'll notice in my version, at least, I now get a few rows here, 2018 and 2019 and grand total. In your version of Excel, depending on what version you're using, you may see something pretty different here. In some older versions of Excel, it might go so far as to list each individual date that an order took place on over here in the order list. Of course, that's not, there are some orders that, that took place on the same day as another order, but that's a lot of dates. And so in order to do that, you'll need to kind of, you'll need to dig into, what I'll show you what you'll want to do. Those of you with a newer version of Excel, you won't need to do this, but I want to get everybody on the same page. What you'll want to do is right click on one of these dates and click group. If you're on a computer with a touchpad, by the way, rather than right click, you're tapping with 2 fingers. I'll click on group. And then make sure that you have months, quarters, and years selected here in this box and click OK. And that's going to give you this situation right here. Oh, okay, it expanded it out for me for some reason. Anyway, so, so I've got, now that I've put the dates in here, it's done a few things. Number one, it has actually automatically grouped it for me. So I've got years, quarters, and then date here, which actually represents the months at this point. So I have extra fields that that aren't a column over in the order list, and that's okay. Basically, those are still based on the information that's in your columns. It's just grouped up so that it's a little bit easier to read. And then, but let's look at what our data is telling us right here in the pivot table. So we have our 2018 row, and here on the 2018 row we have Canada, or we have a total for Canada, a total for the US, and a grand total. So this is the grand total of all the revenue that was brought in from orders during 2018. This is the US share of that, and this is the Canada share of that. So again, we've taken that pile of $100 million and we've divided it up. First, we divided it up into 2018 pile and 2019 pile. And then we divided the 2018 pile into the Canada 2018 pile and the US 2018 pile. And then we have the grand total here, which is both. And similarly, we took the 2019 pile and we divided it up into the Canada 2019 pile and the US 2019 pile. And then down here at the bottom, of course, we have the totals for each one. So this is, again, what we saw before, the total of 22 million-ish that we brought in from Canada, and the total of 78 million-ish that we brought in from the US over the 2 years of orders that we're tracking. So there it is, our grand total once again, but it's divided up in all these useful ways that give us more information. If we want, we can divide it even further, or we can see that it's divided even further by clicking the plus sign here. And actually, you'll probably see this situation right here. So I'll click the plus sign, and now it's giving me, smaller numbers for each of the quarters of 2018. So took our 2018 pile and we divided it up into Canada and the US, but then we can take the Canada pile and we can divide it up into 4 more piles: the first quarter pile, the second quarter pile, the third quarter pile, and the fourth quarter pile. In the US, we can do the same thing: first quarter pile, second quarter pile, third quarter pile, fourth quarter pile. And we can add them together. So we have the first quarter pile here for Canada and the first quarter pile for the US, and then a grand total for Q1 of 2018. So, and then we can do the same thing with 2019. We can also expand the first quarter to see individual months. So we have January and February and March, and totals for Canada for those months, totals for the US for those months, grand totals for those months. So we can get a lot of information here just based on a few little actions. If I want, let's say that I'm not too concerned about each individual month. I'd rather just take the quarters in total and look at them rather than worrying about the months themselves. What I can do is come over here where it says rows, and I can take this date field and I can just drag it up here back into the fields list and drop it there. What that's going to do is just leave me with years and quarters. And that's all that I'll see in the listing here. So I've got my 2018 year, and then I've got Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. By the way, one thing that happens to folks every now and then from time to time is they're when I'm doing this class, usually it happens at least once to somebody. So I do want to show you how to recover from it. If your sidebar over here goes away, it's not a big deal, and it's easy to fix, thankfully. So usually when that happens, it's because you clicked on a cell that's outside of the pivot table. So if I click somewhere like here, you'll notice it's disappeared. I'm actually going to zoom in again. And then, but if I click over here back in cell A3, you'll notice it comes right back for me. So the main thing that, the only thing you need to worry about if that sidebar disappears is just clicking some cell that's inside, that has the pivot table, that has part of the pivot table in it. The way that, or what I would do with this, or what I would suggest would be, while you're working with your pivot table, just keep your selection on cell A3, unless there's a reason to click somewhere else, because cell A3 is always going to be part of the pivot table. That's where it starts essentially. Okay, cool. So let's take a look at one other, let's take a look at another option that we have that's really handy, and that's filtering our data for the pivot table. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click I'm going to click on salesperson and drag it into this filters area. So now we have all 4 of our boxes with some data in them. When I put the salesperson in filters, you'll notice it says salesperson and then all in parentheses up here. If I click the drop-down box, then I can choose either all or one of the salespeople that's listed on my order list here. Let's choose Delma for now. I'll click on Delma and I can click OK. If I want, I could see multiple multiple salespeople at once by checking select multiple items. And then I get check boxes next to each one. For now, we'll go with Delma and I'll click OK. All right. So you'll notice all my numbers changed down here. So I've got, so just looking at the grand total here for everything, I now have $17,465,599.60 rather than that 100 million. So that's what this, so, and then, you know, I have smaller numbers for all of these. So what's happened here is before the data even goes into the rest of the pivot table, it goes through this filter selection here. I'll click on the filter and, or I'll click on the filters, or if I click on this, then basically I can select which salesperson's numbers I want to see. And it'll only show me numbers from that salesperson. Specifically, just to call this out, specifically what's happening here is in the order list here, Excel is going through and trying to analyze this, all of this order data. And so when I have the Delma filter in place there, then what it's doing is for each row that has data on it, it's looking to see, okay, does this row have Delma's name here in the salesperson column? If it does, like this one, then we'll throw it into the mix here. Like this $53,000 order counts towards Delma's total sales number, right? But over here, the previous row, row 28, does not have Delma's name as the salesperson. And so this does not count toward that grand total with the Delma filter in place, right? So these are the numbers from only the rows that have Delma listed as the salesperson. And that gives us, well, the amount of sales that Delma specifically has done. If I switch over to Flannery, then the numbers all change there. So there's a bunch of different stuff. There's a bunch of different stuff that we can do here to change it up depending on what kind of information we're looking for out of our data. Let's say that we want to find out, let's say that we want to find out where, what was it? Oh yeah. Well, for one thing, let's say that we want to rearrange this. Maybe we want essentially the same data, but we want to sort it out somehow. What we can do is, this is the point where we pivot. So I'm going to come over here under my rows. You'll notice it says years and quarters. I'm going to take the years and I'm going to drag it over into this columns area. When I do that, you'll notice that things have changed pretty dramatically. I only have quarters down here in the rows area, but I have country and years in the columns area. What happens is, or now that I've got that, what's going to happen is we've got our excuse me. We've still got the Flannery filter here. And if you look at our columns, we now have kind of a larger column and then smaller columns underneath it. So we have the Canada column because country is at the top here. And then we have a 2018 column, a 2019 column, and a Canada total column. So what we've got, we have two layers of columns here, the country column and then the sort of sub columns for each year underneath that. If I drag the quarters over here as well, then we're going to have very big columns, or very wide columns at least, where we actually have a big column for Canada and then sub columns for 2018 and then each of the quarters, and then sub column for 2019 and each of the quarters inside of that as well. But we don't really want that. What we want to do is we want to actually grab the country and drag it in here. And now what we have is basically the same data that we had before, but instead of having our countries as the columns, we now have our dates as the columns, and then we have countries as the rows instead. So if we were dealing with a lot more countries, it might make more sense to do that. rather than have it arranged the other way. I can actually even flip this if I want. So maybe grab the salesperson and bring that in. If I drop that under country, we now get 2 big rows and a bunch of smaller rows. Well, not including the grand total row. That's separate, I guess. But we have a big Canada row. And then inside of that Canada row, we have the numbers for Cassius in Canada, the numbers for Delma in Canada, numbers for Flannery in Canada, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have another, but all of those numbers were 2018. And then we have 2019 numbers for Canada up here, 2019 numbers for the US. So it all depends very greatly on what information you're trying to extract and kind of what and how you want it to be read. One nice way to do it, I could put the salesperson up here. Actually, I want to flip this back. So I'm going to put my years and my quarters here, my country back in the columns. This is pretty nice and compact, very readable. And now I can go up here and choose a salesperson, to see their information. If I flip these years and quarters, you'll notice if I drag the quarters down underneath, or the years underneath quarters, then I'll actually have a row for each quarter and then sub rows for the years. So this is the Q1 big row, and then the sub rows are 2018 and 2019. So that's what when we talk about when it's called a pivot table, that's what we're referring to. Is you can turn the data in different ways by rearranging your columns and your rows and everything to make it look exactly the way you want it to look and pull out the kind of information that's going to help you in whatever it is you're doing. There are a couple of additional things to show you, little helpful tricks that I definitely want to make sure that you see. One big thing to mention that I didn't touch on right away, but I do want to mention it, is once you create a pivot table, and as long as you, again, have a cell selected that's in the pivot table, like A3, for example, then I'll get 2 additional tabs up here, the Pivot Table Analyze tab, which gives me a bunch of tools to look at my data and change it in different ways. In fact, there's a recommended pivot tables button. If I click on that, it'll kind of look at my data and try to figure out, like, how might you want this data sorted? So here's one suggestion they have is to arrange it by country and by country and then by state or province. So I've got my big country rows here, and then I have Alberta, British Columbia, Manitoba, etc. And then I have a count of orders. So this is just going to be the raw number of orders rather than the total revenue from those orders. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But you can, but this could give you some insights potentially that you haven't even thought of checking in terms of how your data works. And we've got pivot charts up here too, which we'll touch on here in a second. There's other things like the timeline and the slicer, or not splicer, slicer, which we don't necessarily have time to get into. One thing I want to point out, though, well, we do have a pivot table name here, so you can name it, or you can use a name just like you would with a range, like we talked about earlier with the tables. And then there are these 2 buttons here, refresh and change data source. And this gets into why I had us change our order list into a table before we created a pivot table from our order list. The reason for that is because of this, essentially. When you create a pivot table, Excel basically takes a snapshot of your data and says, like, okay, this is the data that they have right now. We're going to use this to build the pivot table. If I make changes to my data later on, I do have to refresh my my snapshot in order to work with the current data. So if I went over here, if I noticed there were some issues with the numbers over here, or that maybe somebody's state or province wasn't listed correctly or whatever. Once I made that change, I do need to come over here to the sheet that has the pivot table on it and click refresh right here. And that's going to update the snapshot with the latest data. If I had additional rows of data, like let's say I added the 2021 orders or whatever to my, or 2020 orders, I guess, to this order list. Oh, hang on just a sec, y'all. There we go. Okay. All right. So let's say that I added some additional rows of data. I have another year's worth of sales numbers, things like that. If that's the case, then in addition to just going over here and clicking refresh, whoops, on the pivot table analyze tab here, I would also have to click change data source, and I would have to resize if I were not using a table. I would have to click change data source, and I would have to resize the source range, the group of cells that Excel was pulling my pivot table data from, in order to update things properly. Thankfully, if I first turn my data into a table, then when I come over here, even if I add new rows to the table, I can just click refresh and Excel will go, oh, wait, okay, we're still using this table, but there are some new rows in the table. So I'm gonna throw those into the data set and we're gonna be able to analyze those too. So it saves you some effort and it makes it easier to, it makes it easier to kind of to update your data set when you need to. Okay, so the pivot table design tab is not super duper interesting, but you can change a few things. You can change whether they're abandoned rows or columns here, like we had with the tables. You could change the style, like the color scheme and things like that. And you can also add subtotal and grand total rows and columns if you want to, although we kind of already have those, so we're not going to fiddle with that very much right now because there's other more interesting things to do. One thing that I want to show you is the number settings here. Okay, so down here we did our sum of amount and we added and we dragged the total amount of revenue. Excuse me, or we generated the total amount of revenue from all of our orders by just putting that amount field down here under values. Again, you always want a numerical value under this values area. Otherwise, your pivot table won't work the way that you expect it to. What I want to do next is I want to click where it says sum of amount, and I want to click on value field settings right here and click OK, and click on that, excuse me. When I do that, it gives me this value field settings dialog box that pops up. It says custom name, sum of amount, and then I've got, and then I have summarized values by. So far we've been summarizing them by the sum. So we've been actually adding all of the numbers together, that pile of $100 million, and then we've been dividing it up, right? But what if we just wanted to see how many orders of whatever amount our salespeople were processing? If that's the case, then I'm going to click on count instead, and I'll click OK. And now my numbers have changed pretty significantly. So what this is telling me is all my salespeople in first quarter of 2018 and 2019 processed a total of 55 orders in Canada. So 55 Canadian orders in Q1 of 2018 plus Q1 of 2019. 26 of those were in 2018. 29 of those were in 2019. So now I can get a whole different perspective on my data. And I can see there were a total of 1,000 orders in my data set. I can see like, okay, 216 orders were from Canada, 784 orders were from the US, and so on and so forth. So that gives me a different way to look at my data and see this, in this case, a count rather than adding those numbers together. And you have a whole bunch of other things. You can have an average. So if you wanted to see, well, what's the average revenue from orders in, say, Q2 in the US in 2018? Well, the average revenue from an order at that point, $98,827.38 here. So you can do a bunch of different things there. You can find the maximum or the minimum, and that'll just pick the highest. So if I click maximum, it would give me the highest number, the highest dollar amount order, basically. I've got the minimum, which does the same thing, but with the lowest number. The product, if you want to multiply them together. Count numbers, that'll count how many things there are with a number value in them specifically. Standard deviations, something else to do with standard deviations. And I have no idea what this var is, but you could do any of those. You could do any of those that you want and kind of break down your data that way. Another thing that you can do, just to make it a little easier to read even, is click on number format down here. And I'm going to choose currency. That looks fine. This is our number formatting, just like we talked about in Excel part 1, where you can format cells according to, the numbers that are going to live in them. So in this case, we have our number format, or we have our kind of traditional number format with dollar signs, commas, and decimal points in front of the number of cents there. I'll click OK. And I am going to use sum on this because it wouldn't make sense if we did count, although average, it would make sense to use a dollar amount. I'll click OK. And now we have more readable numbers here. So we've got $5,516,980.60. So you can change the format of the way numbers are written as well. All right. Let's go ahead and I'll show you briefly PivotCharts, and then we'll move on to our VLOOKUP example here. As we're working in our pivot table, again, make sure you have a cell selected that's inside the pivot table. As we're working in there, we have a pivot chart button at the top. If I click on that, then it's going to give me essentially our insert chart dialog box that we had last time. But rather than using the raw data from our data set, which could be pretty overwhelming, instead, we're going to use the summary information that Excel is getting from our pivot table. So in this case, like, for example, we could do a line chart that's got, that's a little weird with the way that, okay, let's flip this, put the years back on top here. Okay. So for example, if we did the line chart here, we can see like, it gives us an orange line for the US, a blue line for Canada, and then we have our dollar amounts on the left and our quarters and years on the bottom there. Previously, when I had quarters on top of years over in the rows area, it had Q1 as a group, and then 2018 and 2019 as two stops along the line, basically, and then Q2 as a group, and then 2018 and 2019, and so on. I could do a pie chart, so I could see like which quarter did my revenue come from. Did most of my revenue come from? I could do a bar chart here, like a clustered bar chart. Orange is US, blue is Canada. All kinds of things. There's a whole lot of possibilities there. Just to, again, depending on what kind of information you're trying to pull out and represent to your audience. Let's see. We'll go ahead and do a clustered column chart this time. I'll click OK. And there we go. So now we've got our chart. It behaves very similarly to the charts that we did in part 2. So I'm not necessarily going to do a whole ton with that. Up here at the top, we have our Pivot Chart Analyze tab, which has a lot of the same tools as our Pivot Table Analyze tab does. We can move the chart. We can, we can rename it and so on. Up here in the Design tab, we can change the look of it to whatever we want it to be. That's cool. We got a little shadow there. We can switch our rows and columns. So if I wanted, for example, okay, so that's a little hard to read. We've got our dollar amounts here on the left, and then we have a Canada group and a US group. That's not really working. And you could change the chart type if you want to. And then under format, you can kind of tweak the settings a little bit more closely if you want to. But you can also change the way that the pivot chart is acting, or the way that the pivot chart's arranged, right from inside of this chart. So if I go up to the salesperson, I can filter and see only Ray's numbers. So Ray had these numbers in Q1 of 2018, these numbers in Q1 or Q2 of 2018, and so forth. So I can filter like that. I can sort or filter based on the country over here. I can change, I could see only, say, 2019 numbers, for example, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff you can do there from, essentially changing the arrangement of the pivot table just by changing some of these settings here. And this would be really hard to represent with the raw data, but once you get your pivot table squared away, it's pretty easy to represent. All right. So that's pivot tables and pivot charts. Like I said at the end of last week's session, there are a lot of people who are good at Excel who aren't so good at pivot tables. So now you know how to do pivot tables, and many of those people will look at you like a wizard if you tell them that you can use a pivot table. Any questions about any of that stuff before we move on to our last example? All right. Thank you. Someone said good lessons over on the YouTube channel. I appreciate that. Let me go ahead and get us to our into our last example here. This is going to bring together a few different strands of things that we've learned and give us a new little toy to play with. So here's what we need to do. In this example, I'm putting together some sort of a little get together where everybody goes, they stay at a hotel, and maybe we have a little conference or something like that. A leadership meeting or whatever. So I have two sheets here that we're gonna work in both for this example. There's a sheet called this year and a sheet called last year. When I click on the last year sheet, you'll notice I have a bunch of people here, and their information, name, address, phone number, email address. And then we have two columns here, one for meal preference and one for room number. Those things are going to change. So we're going to basically disregard those. And we're just going to use this stuff here to make sure everything is basically what we want to do is just when someone says that they're coming, we just want to fill their information in without us having to go and look it up and copy and paste it every time, because that could get annoying, particularly if we add more people than this. So I'm going to click back over to the this year sheet, and we're going to use a formula to make this happen. First of all, I do want to point out in column A here, you'll notice there's a little drop-down arrow. If I click the drop-down arrow next to one of these cells, you'll notice data validation has been turned on. We talked about data validation last week when we were talking about avoiding errors. And so data validation has been turned on. And basically, I've got it set up so that over here, this list of names, those are the only things that you can put in column A. So I can select a name and then it fills it in for me. Great. So I've got a name selected here. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click in cell B2. And this is where we're going to write our formula, our original version of the formula, which we're going to then copy and paste into a bunch of other cells here. Okay, so selected cell B2. I'm going to come up to the top and click in the formula bar here. Now, again, you don't have to click the formula bar in order to write a formula. Formulas, you can write a formula down here in the body of the cell, but my preference is to click in the formula bar at the top because that makes it a lot easier to correct mistakes when you make them. I'm not going to say if you make them, you're human. So when you make mistakes, you can correct them more easily in the error bar. And Lord knows I make some mistakes myself. So don't feel bad about it. That's how it works. Okay, so I've clicked in the formula bar. I'm going to hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula because every formula in Excel has to start with an equal sign. Once I've hit the equal sign, then I'm going to bring in our brand new function that we're learning in this session. And that's VLOOKUP. So it's going to be V as in Victor, and then look up, all one word, VLOOKUP. And then I'm going to hold Shift and press 9 to open a set of parentheses here. Once I do that, you'll notice I have my little hint system showing up here, prompting me for the information that the VLOOKUP function needs to work. The arguments, if you recall, is what we call those. So the first argument is lookup value, and then there's one called table array, and then there's one called call index num or column index number. And then finally, there's an optional one in square brackets here that's range lookup. So we're going to walk through these one by one, and then we're going to talk about specifically what the formula is doing once we've got it. Okay, so the first thing is going to be the lookup value. Well, what this VLOOKUP function does is it looks for information. Basically, it takes a piece of information and it looks for a matching cell somewhere else in your workbook. And then it brings back information from the same row that matching cell is in. So our lookup value is going to be the thing that we're looking for a match for. So the lookup value in this case is going to be cell A2 over here. So I'm just going to type A2. You'll notice it color codes in blue here and here. So I know I'm pointing to the right cell. Okay, next thing that I need to do, I'm going to hit a comma here. And I've got my table array. That's the second argument that I'm being asked for. The table array is going to be where it looks for a match for, in this case, the name Sakiko Herod. So we want to point Excel to the group of cells over on the last year sheet that has that information in it. So there's a little shortcut of a way to do this. And I want to show you this so that you can do it intentionally, because I've definitely done it unintentionally many times. And I know a lot of other people do this as well. So I want to point it out to you so that you know how to avoid it and you know how to do it when it's actually helpful for you. So here's what you do. I'm going to make sure that I'm still editing my formula. So I've still got a little blinking cursor either here or here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and click on the last year sheet. And when I do that, you'll notice it puts apostrophe last year, apostrophe, exclamation point in my formula without me typing anything there. What that's telling Excel is I'm going to give you a cell or a group of cells, but they're going to be on another sheet. So you're going to need to look on this other sheet that the separate from where the formula that we're writing lives. Then we've got so then what I need to do is tell it which cells on this last year sheet have the information we need. So I'm going to move my mouse over cell A2, hold down with the mouse button and drag until I get cells A2 to D11 selected here. A2 to D11, which has this email address in it. Again, I'm not going to choose these cells. You could do it. It's probably not going to break anything, but I'm not going to choose these cells because because none of this information hopefully is going to apply. Almost none of this information is probably going to apply next time. They're just going to have to signal their meal preferences separately. And of course, the hotel is probably going to put them in different rooms, not the one room that they were in last time. So we've got that selected, and you'll notice that Excel filled in A2 colon D11 at the top. Then I'm going to hit comma again on my keyboard, and we're being prompted for that third argument, column index number. The column index number is a little weird. Okay, so we selected our table array, our group of cells that has the information that we want to look up, right? But we need to tell it which information specifically it needs to find for us. So it's going to find a match over here in column A, and that's the first column of our table array of those cells that we selected. What we want in column B on our other sheet is we want the street address. So the street address is in this second column from the left. So we're actually going to put column index number 2. The tricky thing with this is you could just look at it and say, well, B is the second letter of the alphabet. So we put 2 here to tell it, look in the second column. But if our table array, if our cells that we're finding information in started in, say, column C here, or column D, excuse me, and we were looking for the information in column F, then we would actually put 3 as our column index number here, because this would be the farthest left that our table array goes, and this would be the third column from the left. All we're doing with this column index number is we're counting columns from the left-hand side of our table array to the column with the information that we actually want Excel to bring back to us. So the column index number is 2 because we're looking for the information in this second column, which is the address. Finally, we've got our range lookup here. And I'm going to hit comma on my keyboard. And then we're being prompted for one of 2 things, either true or false. If we use true, then it's going to accept an approximate match for whatever it's trying to find a match for. If we do false, then it's got to find an exact match here. In my opinion, 99.9% of the time, the correct answer is false. You want to use that. So we are going to use false here. I'm going to just type false. And that's it. I'm going to close my parentheses, Shift 0. And there we have it. So the reason that I say choose false the majority of the time is, in my experience, Excel is not necessarily good at figuring out what's an approximate match and what's just not a match at all. And so what it's going to do is it's going to look through here and it's going to find something that it figures as an approximate match. The first thing that it comes to that it thinks is close enough, it's going to settle for that thing. And so we have Elizabeth Kirk here. If it thinks Ella Mazanders, well, that starts with EL, right, is a close enough match, then it's going to, or if it thinks Elizabeth Kirk is a close enough match for Ella Mazanders, then it's going to settle for this, and it's going to give me this address rather than the correct one. So I've not had good luck with that. I highly recommend using false most of the time. And since I used my man, since I used the oh boy, my brain is just what is that? Oh, the data validation. Thank you. Since I use data validation to make sure that only these names are acceptable anyway, there's no way we could have an approximate match. It would be, an exact match is easy to get, and that'll be what we want. So I'm going to choose false. I'm going to type false here, close my parentheses, and I'll hit the check mark or press enter on my keyboard. And it takes me back to the this year sheet. And sure enough, it fills in 7356 Blue Sky Pike. And when I click over to the last year sheet to check it, 7356 Blue Sky Pike, that's correct. So far, so good. So we've written our this version of the formula, and it seems to be working. If I come down here and pick a different name, Elizabeth Kirk, and then I copy the formula down, or I autofill, I can click the little dot and drag it to autofill a ways. Then it's going to give me, oh, it's working there too. Now it is going to give me this not applicable. I could use what we learned from last week with the logical functions to make it not show not applicable if this was blank and just look like a blank cell, but we're not going to really bother with that this time. But we could do that if we wanted to. And that's a good little practice project for you if you decide you want to do it. Okay, but if I go a little further down here and I select a cell, and I select a name, you'll notice it doesn't give me the correct result over here to the side. The reason for this is you'll be able to see it by looking at the formula here. So we have A8. That's correct. We're looking for a match for whatever is in this cell, in this case, the name Elizabeth Kirk. But up here at the top in the formula, you'll notice it says VLOOKUP A8, and then it's looking on the last year sheet, and it's looking in cells A8 to D17. Whoopsie. Okay, so if I click over here, cells A8 to D17 are these cells right here. So if I'm looking for a match for Elizabeth Kirk, there's no match for Elizabeth Kirk in these cells because it's a moot, because Excel tried to be helpful and update all of my row numbers in the formula, but as it did so, it moved me out of range. So now I no longer have a match for Elizabeth Kirk in my table array because it's looking in the wrong place. So what we want to do, as you might guess from previous sessions here, what we want to do is actually use a name for this range of cells or just an absolute reference to make it to make the formula a little bit more readable and to make this work properly. So I'm going to select cells A2 to D11, or I could select more if I wanted to, doesn't matter. I'm going to click up here in the name box where it says A2, and I'm going to put old info as the name. Don't put a space in there. It won't accept it. At least I don't think. So now I've named this particular range of cells, A2 to D11, old info. So if I click around everywhere else, it just D19, A17, etc. But if I select these specific cells, old info is the name of this range here. So now if I go back to my original formula, I can get rid of, so I'm going to click in cell B2 to go to the original version. And I've got VLOOKUP A2, that's correct. And then after the comma, so there's A2 comma, and then last year in apostrophes and all of this other stuff, I'm going to get rid of all of that. And we've got A2 comma, comma 2. In between these two commas, I'm just going to put old info. and I'll press enter or hit my check mark. And what that's going to do is, well, it works the same, but when I double click on the dot to replace the old versions of the formula with this version, this actually works properly because old info stays the same in all these versions of the formula. And again, anywhere that I want to refer to this group of cells throughout my whole workbook, I can just use the word or the name old info in my formula rather than saying like, oh, look on the last year sheet and it's like A2 to D11. I can just put old info. Very, very handy. And you'll notice it works if I select other stuff here. Great. Okay. So this is working, but we have one more problem that we want to sort out in order to make this work properly in other spots. So I'm going to slide this on over to autofill to column C. You'll notice I get not applicable again. And I've got a couple of problems here with this version of the formula where it says B2. It's now looking for a match for the address. It's looking in the same table array, but it's looking in column 2 to bring me back the answer. So it's actually going 7356 Blue Sky Pike. Let's look for a match for that. And it goes over, whoops, to this sheet. And it says, oh, here it is, 7356 Blue Sky Pike. Okay, which column do you want me to look in? Second column from the left, huh? Okay, 1, 2. Oh, that's the same information. So it's giving me an error message here for that reason. What I want Excel to do is actually look for the name again, and then go over 3 columns to pull in the phone number. So I'm going to change where it says, so rather than A2 in this, or so rather than A2, just A2 in the original version of the formula. So I'm back in cell B2. I'm going to click B2. I'm going to come up here to the top in cell B2 or in the formula bar with cell B2 selected. And I'm going to put a $ in front of the A here, $A2 and check the check mark. That's going to give me, so this version of the formula is going to look the same. And I'll go ahead and double click to flash fill it on down. But if I click on the dot and drag it over into this cell, it's actually working just a little bit better. Now it's looking for the name and it's finding a match for the address. All I need to do is come up here to the top, change this column index number from 2 to 3. Hit the check mark. And then there we have the phone number. If I double click to flash fill on down, then for each of these where I've selected a name, it also brings me back the phone number. So that's working great. Finally, we have the email column here. I'm going to drag over one more time. And it's still giving me the phone number because I've got my column index number wrong there. So I'm going to click where it said 3 and I'm going to backspace and go 4. Hit the check mark. Whoops. Sorry, changed the wrong column there. Okay, I need to actually go to cell D2, change my column index number to 4. And then again, I can double click on the dot to flash fill this down. And now my formula is working correctly. So anytime I select one of these names, it then automatically goes and looks up the street address, the phone number, and the email address. And that's it. What questions do y'all have for me before we wrap it up for today? I don't see anything. So if you are typing a question, keep typing and we'll wrap it up in the meantime. Thank you all so much for joining me. It's been wonderful to have you here for the course. If there are any of the sessions that you missed, again, you can find them on the CALS YouTube channel. The easiest way to get to that is to head to cals.link/YouTube. And I'll drop that in the chat. Nancy, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciated your questions, and I'm just pointing out a couple of things that went wrong so that we could correct them. And I'm so glad that everybody was here and having fun. Hopefully you learned a lot. If you do have follow-up questions afterwards, please feel free to circle back. You can send me an email, nsmith@cals.org, and I'll be happy to answer those questions. Soon you'll be able to come see me at the main library. But thank you all so much. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.